At 07:42 a.m., April 8th, 1940, the Norwegian sea burned grey under sleet and spray. HMS Glowworm cut through the swell like a hunted wolf, her hull trembling at 28 knots. Salt lashed the bridge windows, men shouted against the wind, the radar crackled with static. Enemy destroyers sighted. Bearing 135, Lieutenant Commander Gerard Roope tightened his grip on the voice pipe. Action stations. Load the forward mounts. The North Atlantic wind screamed across the deck guns. Somewhere beyond the squall, German steel was closing. In the radio room, a signalman tried to reach the fleet. No reply. The convoy had vanished into the storm. Glowworm was alone. Beneath the deck, stokers shoveled coal into roaring furnaces, sweat mixing with soot. Above, lightning flashed over the mast as Roope steadied his binoculars and whispered, "Then it's just us." None aboard knew they were minutes from immortality. The morning sea felt wrong on April 8, 1940. Low clouds pressed the horizon flat, and the waves rolled like steel sheets northwest of Trondheim. HMS Glowworm, a G-class destroyer, barely 1,500 tons displacement, was supposed to be with the home fleet, part of Operation Wilfred, laying mines off Norway to block German ore shipments from Narvik. But the storm had scattered them in the night. Inside the wheelhouse, condensation dripped from pipes. Men rubbed frost from the dials. Every rivet seemed to hum with the vibration of her Parsons geared turbines pushing 34,000 shaft horsepower. Roope stood at the chart table, jaw locked. A former navigator turned captain, he'd inherited Glowworm just months before during the Norwegian deployment preparations. Her nickname among the men was the Tin Lady, thin-hulled, fast, and expendable. British destroyers were built to chase U-boats and screen capital ships, not endure surface engagements. Against battleships or cruisers, they were paper and courage. "Compass steady at 045, sir," reported Sub-Lieutenant Robert Ramsay, his breath visible in the cold bridge air. Roope nodded. "Hold her there. We'll find our bearings, then signal back to Renown's group." But the radio hissed dead. Only static and the occasional atmospheric burst from distant lightning. Somewhere beyond the grey wall, warships were manoeuvring, both British and German. Intelligence had warned of German fleet movements toward Norway. Roope felt it in his bones, the tension before contact. "Mr. Ramsay," he said, voice level, "double-check our position against the storm drift. I want confirmation we haven't been pushed north of Trondheim." A tremor ran through the ship as a wave slammed her bow. Men steadied themselves against consoles and bulkheads. The smell of salt, fuel oil, and anxiety filled the air. Outside, the deck gun crews waited in their oilskins, wiping ice from their sights. 4.7-inch guns in single mounts, adequate for destroyers, inadequate for anything larger. They knew what the Germans called ships like theirs, Blechdosen, tin cans. Records later showed Glowworm had drifted 23 nautical miles north-northeast during the storm. She was exactly where German warships would pass. By mid-morning, the sea began to calm slightly. Steam rose from the twin funnels in long white ribbons. At 8 hours, a lookout shouted from the forward crow's nest, "Smoke off the port bow! 2 sources!" Roope swung his binoculars toward the bearing. 2 shapes emerged through the haze. German destroyers, type 1934 A-class, sharp-nosed and capable of 38 knots. The nearest bore the markings Z11 Bernd von Arnim. The second was Z18 Hans Ludemann. "Enemy confirmed," Roope said calmly. "They've spotted us. Range approximately 12,000 yards." "Orders, sir?" Ramsay's voice carried the weight of knowing what came next. Roope hesitated just long enough to feel the weight of the decision. Running was pointless, they were faster. Hiding was impossible. The weather was clearing. Close range. Engage when in effective firing distance. The ship came alive. Action station sirens wailed. Men sprinted to the turrets, slamming watertight doors behind them. Ammunition hoists clanked as shells slid into breaches, each round weighing 50 pounds. The twin 4.7-inch guns swung left, finding range through the fog, their crews adjusting elevation wheels with practiced precision. At 08:20 hours, the first salvo thundered. 2 flashes from forward mounts, then the recoil shook the deck plating. The rounds vanished into mist, falling somewhere near the German formation. Return fire erupted from both destroyers, their 12.7-centimeter guns flashing in sequence. Shells screamed low over the water, their distinctive whistle cutting through the wind. One burst slammed into the sea 50 yards off the port side, throwing up a geyser of salt and spray that drenched the forward gun crew. The destroyers danced across the grey horizon like duelling swordsmen, dodging, firing, closing. Spray blinded the gun layers between salvos. Rangefinders struggled to hold targets in the heaving seas. Down below, Chief Engineer Parker and his crew pushed the turbines to maximum revolutions. The gauges trembled at the red line, boiler pressure climbing past rated limits. "She won't hold much longer, Chief," shouted a stoker, face black with coal dust. "She'll hold," Parker replied, feeding more coal into the roaring furnaces. The gun crews adjusted range continuously. 8,000 yards. Fire. 2 shells struck near von Arnim's bow, fragments scattering across her deck. Plating. Smoke poured from a damaged ventilator. Then, through the binoculars, Roope saw something else. A vast shadow emerging from behind the German destroyers. Larger, heavier, a different silhouette entirely. "By God," he breathed, "that's no destroyer." Out of the mist at 08:50 hours loomed Admiral Hipper, a 14,000-ton heavy cruiser of the Kriegsmarine, bristling with 8 8-inch guns in 4 twin turrets, secondary armament of 12 10.5cm guns, and an armor belt 100 mm thick. Glowworm's entire hull plating was 13 mm. The sea seemed to shrink beneath Hipper's bulk. She moved with mechanical arrogance, grey paint glistening wet, battle ensigns snapping from her masts, a predator entering a cage too small for its prey. "Range, Mr. Ramsay," Roope's voice remained steady, but every man on the bridge understood the calculation. 6,000 yards and closing. Roope's mind worked through the mathematics of survival. Against destroyers they had a chance. Against a heavy cruiser they had minutes. "Bring her about. Smoke screen. Port quarter. Emergency full ahead." The chemical generators hissed to life, pouring thick white clouds across the waves from canisters mounted aft. The destroyer turned hard to starboard, turbines screaming their mechanical protest, laying smoke as she zigzagged through her own fog bank. Shells from Hipper's main battery roared overhead at 08:55 hours, each one 122 kilograms of armor-piercing steel travelling at 800 meters per second. The concussions slammed Glowworm like physical blows even when they missed, shattering bridge glass, denting hull plates, knocking men off their feet. One near miss lifted her stern clear of the water, propellers screaming in open air before she crashed back down. "Engine room reporting flooding in aft storage compartment," a voice crackled through the speaking tube. "Counterflood port side tanks," Roope ordered. "Keep her balanced, maintain smoke generation." On the open bridge wing, sleet and spray stung his face like needles. The ship shuddered with each near miss, but still ran, still answered her helm. Roope looked toward the looming shape in the mist. 8-inch guns cycling, turrets tracking, and whispered, "If that's who we're facing, we'll make her remember us." The log entry recorded only, "Engaged enemy heavy cruiser at approximately 08:55 hours, laid smoke screen and manoeuvred to evade." Admiral Helmuth High, commanding Hipper from her armoured bridge, later wrote in his action report, "A British destroyer appeared through weather, engaged at 6,000 metres. Enemy showed unusual persistence. No one aboard Glowworm expected to see 10 hours. At 09 hours, Admiral Hipper opened full systematic fire. Her 8-inch guns spat flame in rolling salvos, their muzzle blast shockwaves flattening the sea surface around Glowworm. The first salvo fell wide by 200 yards. The second landed close enough to drench the bridge in spray. The third tore through the destroyer's thin superstructure aft of the second funnel like a cleaver through tin. The blast killed 2 men instantly and hurled another overboard into the freezing water. Metal screamed as plates peeled back. Shards of steel ripped across the bridge, slicing through the voice pipe and severing communication lines. Sparks rained down from the shattered rangefinder mount. The smell of cordite mixed with burning paint and rubber insulation. "Midships hit. Fire in the galley spaces," cried a signalman, his voice trembling, face cut by flying glass. "Fire parties forward. Go," Roope barked. "Starboard hose team. Get that pressure up. Contain it before it reaches the magazine." Beneath deck, petty officers tore open fire lockers with shaking hands. Steam hissed as canvas hoses fought against the inferno spreading through the mess deck. Above, gun crews fired blind through smoke and spray, loading by muscle memory. The forward turret jammed after 3 rounds, its breech mechanism warped by heat from a nearby fire. The men's hands bled from hauling shell cases, still warm from previous barrages, brass scorching through their gloves. "Sir, aft mounts out. Barrel split," reported the gunnery officer through a sound-powered phone. "The electrical circuit's dead." "Then fight with forward guns and port mount. We're not done yet." The destroyer's hull groaned with each turn, but still she manoeuvred inside the enemy's firing arcs, too small and fast for the heavy cruiser's mechanical fire control system to track smoothly. Every second Glowworm lived was defiance bought with speed and courage. Yet Roope knew the mathematics couldn't be denied. Hipper was faster at 32 knots, armoured against anything Glowworm could fire, and deadly accurate. They couldn't run. They couldn't hide in the clearing weather. They could only buy time, and perhaps honour. Records later showed Glowworm absorbed 7 direct hits in the first 15 minutes. Standard doctrine said 3 would sink her. The radio shack at 09:10 hours was half in ruin. Wires dangled like entrails from overhead cable runs, sparks snapping with every roll of the ship. Petty Officer Thomas Morse knelt by the Type 67 transmitter, his face lit by flickering electrical arcs. His headset hissed with atmospheric static and interference. "Sir, main antenna's gone. Shot clean off the mast." His voice carried through the shattered doorway. Roope leaned in through the twisted frame, glass crunching under his boots. "You can fix it, can't you, Morse?" Morse grinned through soot and blood. "Aye, sir. With a prayer and some wire." He stripped a section of copper from a damaged power line, looped it through a broken ladder rung welded to the bulkhead, and tied it into the transmitter terminals with insulating tape. "Try that, sir." Roope nodded. "Send this in clear. Am engaging enemy heavy cruiser position approximately 68 degrees north, 6 degrees east, alone. Continuing action." The brass key clacked like a dying heartbeat, dots and dashes punching into the ether at 500 cycles. Morse's hand moved automatically, translating words into rhythm. Above, another shell screamed overhead and detonated 50 yards off the starboard beam. The blast wave killed the signal mid-transmission, every light in the shack going dark. Morse wiped blood from his forehead where a relay box had struck him. "Think they got it, sir?" Roope stared out the doorway, eyes reflecting orange firelight from the burning mess deck. "They will. Someone will." Later analysis of Admiralty communications logs showed the message never reached Fleet Command. The antenna improvisation lacked sufficient length for long-range transmission. But the attempt itself was recorded in survivor testimony. In 1947, a Norwegian fisherman found a glass float washed ashore near Trondheim. Inside was a note, HMS Glowworm, April 8, 1940. Engaged enemy cruiser. If found, notify Admiralty. The handwriting was never identified. History heard the message anyway. At 09:20 hours, another hit struck forward of the bridge. The deck heaved upward, plates buckling like cardboard. A torrent of seawater flooded the forward storage compartment through a hole 3 feet wide. Men scrambled aft, through knee-deep water, slipping through oil and blood, dragging wounded with them. Chief Engineer Parker shouted over the roar of emergency pumps, straining at maximum capacity. "We can't hold this flooding rate, sir. She's down by the head 3 degrees already. Trim's gone." Roope glanced through the armoured slit of the bridge conning position. The Hipper loomed just 3,000 yards off now, firing methodically, each shell whistling its distinctive shriek. Splinters tore across the bridge rail. The destroyer's hull was a patchwork of holes and smoke, her white ensign still flying from the mainmast. "Can we still steer?" "Aye, but the rudder's responding slow. Hydraulics are damaged." "Then we'll make her earn every hit." He keyed the voice pipe to the torpedo control station. "Prepare torpedoes. Both mounts. Load fish 1 through 4. The order rippled through the compartments like a final sacrament. Men crawled across shattered decks, slick with seawater, loading the 21-inch Mark 9 torpedoes, with hands that shook from cold and adrenaline. Each torpedo carried a 750-pound Torpex warhead, their one real weapon capable of piercing even Hipper's armoured belt if it struck true. Roope squinted through spray and smoke. The cruiser was turning to port, trying to keep her broadside guns on target while maintaining speed. That gave him an angle, a narrow window where her bow would pass through his firing solution. "Range, Mr. Ramsey?" 3,200 yards, sir. Angle on the bow. Port 15. "Good. Calculate torpedo runtime. Set depth 4 meters. The torpedo crews stood by in silence, listening to the rhythm of the failing engines and the scream of incoming shells. One man whispered a prayer, another kissed a photograph tucked inside his helmet. "Standby tubes 1 and 2. The sea rose and fell. The ship trembled. Fire. Compressed air hissed at 60 pounds per square inch. 2 white streaks erupted from the port tubes, Mark 9 torpedoes racing beneath the waves at 41 knots toward the enemy cruiser's projected intercept point. Everyone held their breath. The torpedo crews counted seconds aloud. 38 knots closing speed meant impact in approximately 90 seconds if the solution was correct. Time stretched into viscous slowness. Then, a geyser of water erupted beside Hipper's hull, amidships, white column climbing 50 feet. A near miss. The second torpedo's wake ran wide by 30 yards, missing the stern. "Damn it all!" shouted the torpedo gun captain, slamming his fist against the mount. Roope didn't flinch. "Reload tubes 3 and 4, quickly now." The order came as the deck shook again. Another 8-inch shell exploding 10 yards astern, the blast blowing away the aft torpedo mount completely. The 3-man crew vanished in smoke and flame. Metal fragments clattered across the deck like hail. "Reload forward, tubes only," Roope corrected, voice cutting through the chaos. Ramsey's voice cracked. "Sir, she's got us locked in. Fire control radar is tracking us through the smoke. Then we keep moving. Hard to port. Emergency turn. The wheels spun. The sea rose like a wall on the port side. The destroyer carved through it at 25 knots, water smashing over the bow and sweeping across the deck, washing blood and debris overboard. Every man aboard now understood the mathematics. One direct hit to the magazine would vaporize them, but still they fought, each movement automatic, precise, the rhythm of training overtaking the paralysis of fear. Below decks in the sweltering boiler room, a stoker whispered through cracked lips, "This is the last dance, boys," someone else answered while shoveling coal. "Then we'll make it worth watching." At 09:35 hours, the forward gun mount fired one final round, a 4.7-inch high-explosive shell that struck Hipper's forward superstructure, destroying her secondary fire control station and killing 2 German sailors. It was the last gun Glowworm would fire. The recoil mechanism failed. The breech cracked. The barrel drooped like a broken arm. "Gun's finished, sir," the gunlayer reported, voice flat with exhaustion. Roope nodded once. "Secure the mount. All hands prepare for close action." At 09:40 hours, Glowworm's engines began their death song. Salt water had breached the condensers through hull fractures below the waterline. Steam pressure fell from 300 to 180 pounds. The turbines moaned like dying beasts, their pitch dropping as revolutions per minute decreased. Speed dropped to 18 knots, then 15. Roope stood alone on the port bridge wing, watching the Hipper through the smoke. Towering, almost unscarred except for minor damage to her superstructure. Relentless in her pursuit. The cruiser was turning starboard, closing the range to ensure the kill. He knew there were no more chances. Their guns were silent, their torpedoes spent or damaged. The ship was burning from bow to stern, listing 3 degrees to starboard, down by the head. And yet, she still moved. She still floated. He wiped soot from his face with a torn sleeve. Blood from a scalp cut ran into his left eye. He didn't wipe it away. "Mr. Ramsay," he said quietly, voice barely audible over the wind, "prepare to ram." The words froze everyone within earshot on the bridge. "Sir?" Ramsay turned, face pale. "You heard me. Bring us about. Full ahead, flank speed, whatever she's got left. Straight for her." The helmsman's hands trembled as he grasped the wheel. His voice cracked. "Aye, sir. Steady on collision course." Down below, the engineers heard the order relayed through the speaking tube. They looked at each other across the glowing furnaces, faces black with coal dust, eyes white with understanding. Then they stoked the fires harder, throwing every remaining pound of coal into the boilers. The boiler room glowed like the mouth of hell, temperature climbing past 130 degrees. Roope stepped onto the open bridge rail, wind tearing at his tattered uniform. "Pass the word to all compartments. Any man who wishes may abandon ship. No dishonor, but I'll be staying with her." He looked once more at the massive grey shadow ahead, armor belt gleaming, guns elevated, and whispered into the wind, "Let's show them what tin cans can do." HMS Glowworm, broken and burning, turned her shattered bow toward the enemy. Records show her speed climbed to 22 knots in the final turn. Impossible, according to her damage assessment, but she did it anyway. 09:45 hours. The engines screamed as HMS Glowworm lunged forward through her own smoke, a mortally wounded predator turning on its hunter with the last reserves of mechanical fury. Steam poured from ruptured vents along her hull. The deck slick with seawater, oil and blood. Men clung to their posts, not from orders but from something deeper, knowing the ram wasn't suicide. It was defiance given steel form. "Speed, Mr. Parker," Roope shouted down the speaking tube. "24 knots, sir. That's all she's got. Boilers are failing." The chief engineer's voice was ragged from smoke inhalation. "Good enough. Hold her there. Every last revolution." The Admiral Hipper filled the forward view like a wall of iron. Her bridge towers loomed 30 meters above the waterline, her grey hull gleaming wet in the sleet. Radio masts bristling with antennas. German spotters on her bridge wings saw what was coming and screamed into their voice tubes. The cruiser's helm swung hard to port, her massive turbines reversing thrust to avoid the onrushing destroyer, water churning white at her stern. Too late. Glowworm's shattered bow cut through the whitecaps, closing the last 800 meters in 1 minute 40 seconds. Shells thundered overhead, tearing the sea apart, geysers erupting in a walking pattern that somehow missed the weaving destroyer. Fate or skill, no one would ever know. On the bridge, Roope stood braced against the rail, shouting through the roar of wind and guns. Steady, steady as she goes. Every man aboard could see it now, the moment frozen in grey light and spray, the small British destroyer racing headlong at a ship 10 times her displacement, death written in the mathematics, but honour written in the act. At 400 meters, Roope ordered calmly, "Starboard tube, fire remaining torpedo." One final Mark 9 launched from the damaged mount, white wake cutting diagonally across Hipper's bow. No time to see if it hit, the sea vanished beneath them. At 09:52 hours, HMS Glowworm's bow struck Admiral Hipper's starboard side, 120 feet aft of her stem, metal folding, plates shrieking, rivets exploding into the air like bullets fired from a gun. The impact shook both ships. Sparks flew in a storm of orange light. The collision's force drove Glowworm's bow 15 feet into Hipper's hull, buckling armor plates and crushing compartments. Men on both vessels were thrown to the decks, ears ringing, lungs crushed by the shockwave transmitted through steel. "Collision! Collision!" echoed through Hipper's radio circuits. On Glowworm, the forward magazine detonated. 47 4.7-inch shells, cooking off in a chain reaction, throwing flames 40 feet into the sky. The destroyer's bow section split open like a can opener had torn through her, seawater rushing in as fire roared outward. The pressure wave killed 4 men instantly in the forward compartments. Roope staggered to his feet, ears bleeding, coughing through smoke that tasted of copper and chemicals. "Report damage," he shouted, though every man already knew. The ship was dying. "Forward section gone, sir. Fire spreading to midship's magazine." "Keep her against their hull. Scrape them." "She won't answer the helm. Steering's gone." "Then use the engines. Counter thrust. Port engine full. Starboard reverse." Chief Engineer Parker, bleeding from a head wound, throttled one turbine to full and the other to reverse, forcing the crippled destroyer to veer and scrape alongside Hipper's armor belt, grinding metal against metal for 50 yards. Gun crews on the German deck, barely 50 meters away across open water, stared in disbelief at the wreck still clawing toward them through flame and smoke, her ensigns somehow still flying. Roope grabbed a Lewis gun from its bridge mount and opened fire across the gap. One man with a light machine gun against a cruiser's crew. Bullets sparked harmlessly off armor plating, but he didn't care. It was defiance given form, rage against mathematics. "Keep fighting," he yelled. "Don't give them the satisfaction of an easy kill." One gun crew, working by hand with a damaged 4.7-inch mount, dragged ammunition up from below, shells too hot to touch, wrapped in wet canvas. "Range, 100 meters." The barrel elevated. It fired. The shells struck Hipper's bridge superstructure, blowing apart her signal platform and killing the flag lieutenant. German officers shouted ceasefire, afraid of hitting their own hull at this range. In that moment, The men of Glowworm cheered. A roar lost in wind and explosions. Roope turned to Ramsay, who stood gripping a stanchion, blood running from his nose. "Abandon ship. That's an order, Sub-Lieutenant. But, sir, you can't." "I said go. Get the men off. I'll see you in the water." His voice was firm, final. He glanced one last time at Hipper's bridge, so close he could see individual faces behind armoured glass, officers pointing, shouting orders he couldn't hear. He raised his hand in salute. Whether any German saw it, records don't say. At 09:58 hours, HMS Glowworm heeled sharply to starboard. The sea rushed across her decks, swallowing the flames in clouds of steam. Her keel broke with a sound like a tree splitting. Metal fatigue at the stress point, where the ram impact had fractured her spine. Men leapt into the freezing North Atlantic, 4 degrees Celsius, clinging to debris and empty shell casings, shouting names that were swallowed by wind. Some swam, some floated, some simply disappeared beneath the surface. Roope stood at the starboard rail until water reached his knees. Then he jumped. The impact struck like glass. Cold, pain, silence beneath the surface. He kicked upward, breaking into air, gasping. Around him, oil slicks burned on the surface, diesel fuel from ruptured tanks igniting from electrical sparks. Bodies drifted face down, life jackets keeping them grotesquely afloat. Survivors screamed for help. Through the smoke and spray, the Admiral Hipper's massive hull idled, engines reversing. Then, something impossible happened. The German cruiser stopped. A voice shouted from her deck in German, "Boote aus, rettet sie! Launch boats, save them!" Admiral Helmuth High, standing on his damaged bridge, had given the order personally. Against doctrine, against the operational schedule, he ordered rescue. German sailors threw down lines, pulling survivors aboard. Half-dead men in burned Royal Navy uniforms collapsed on the enemy's metal deck. Among them, Gerard Roope. He was lifted from the water by 2 Kriegsmarine sailors, their hands strong despite exhaustion. They wrapped him in a grey wool blanket. His lips were blue, his eyes unfocused. He looked up at Admiral High, who had come down from the bridge to observe the rescue personally. Roope tried to speak. His mouth moved. No sound came. He managed a nod. The German admiral returned the salute, hand to cap. Minutes later, Gerard Roope collapsed. His heart stopped at 10:17 hours. He never woke. Days later, Admiral Hipper limped into Trondheim harbour, under her own power but requiring immediate dockyard repairs. Her starboard bow bore a jagged scar 40 feet long, a wound left by the destroyer that refused to die. Welders worked for 3 days, cutting away damaged plates. The collision had penetrated 4 inches into her armour belt. Admiral Helmuth High wrote a formal action report to Kriegsmarine headquarters in Berlin, documenting the engagement with technical precision. But he also wrote a private letter to the Royal Navy through the International Red Cross in Geneva, a letter that violated no military protocol but defied every expectation. In it, he described the action exactly as it had occurred, without embellishment or military euphemism. The British commander fought his ship with extraordinary gallantry beyond all expectation. He continued action against hopeless odds, with determination and courage that deserve the highest honour his country can bestow. I recommend him for recognition. The letter travelled through neutral Switzerland, then to London via diplomatic pouch. The British Admiralty received it in late April 1940, weeks after the battle. When it arrived in the Operational Intelligence Centre, silence filled the room. HMS Glowworm's entire crew, 191 officers and men, had been lost except for 31 survivors pulled from the water by German sailors. The ship herself sank stern first in less than 5 minutes after breaking her back, but her captain's defiance had forced a heavy cruiser to withdraw temporarily from operations, delayed elements of the German invasion fleet by 6 hours, and provided intelligence on enemy fleet dispositions that reached London through survivor debriefings. The Admiralty filed the report, added it to casualty lists already growing long, noted the loss with the quiet accounting of war, but High's letter was marked with a flag. Exceptional circumstances. Recommend review for honours. No enemy had ever recommended a British officer for the Victoria Cross until April 8, 1940. In July 1945, 3 months after Germany's surrender, the full account of HMS Glowworm's final action was declassified. The Admiralty's Honours and Awards Committee convened to review wartime citations that had been delayed or disputed. Gerard Roope's file included Admiral High's letter, now translated and authenticated, survivor testimony from both British and German sailors, damage assessments from Hipper's repair logs, intelligence analyses of the engagement's strategic impact. The committee deliberated for 2 hours. Lieutenant Commander Gerard Roope was posthumously awarded the Victoria Cross, the first naval VC of World War II. The recommendation came not from British command, but from his enemy, Admiral Helmut High of the Admiral Hipper. The citation, published in the London Gazette on July 10, 1945, read, "For valour in challenging hopeless odds and continuing in action after his ship was severely damaged, finally ramming the enemy, Lieutenant Commander Roope displayed courage and resolution of the very highest order." In 1947, Admiral High testified at Nuremberg, not as a defendant, but as a witness. When asked about the incident, he said simply, "Some men teach you what honour means. Commander Roope was such a man. Today, HMS Glowworm rests under 430 metres of Norwegian sea, water, position 68°07'N, 06°22'E. Norwegian survey ships located the wreck in 1986 using side-scan sonar. Photographs show her bow section separated from the stern, both sections upright on the seafloor. Divers report the bow still points northeast, the heading she held in her final charge. Maritime researchers say the currents produce a low-frequency vibration against her torn plates, a phenomenon called hull singing, where water flow across wreckage creates sound. The frequency measures approximately 40 Hz, the same pitch as a turbine at cruise power, and if you lower a hydrophone 400 meters into that cold darkness and listen through decades of silence and depth, you might still hear it, the echo of her engines, the ghost of speed, a rhythm that sounds almost like words. Full ahead, steady as she goes, just us. The sea remembers what the files almost forgot,